let's talk about Explosive Shot. A few days ago, I put out a showcase basically saying that I want to put this build into endgame and that I will be progressing this all the way. And I can safely say this build is a banger. In this video, I'll tell you everything you need to know in order to get from level 1 to level, what am I currently at? 87. With frequent updates over the next week or so, whenever I find out new stuff. This will be quite extensive. If you want to jump around, timestamps are up here. And you can also obviously use the chapter system. First important note, I'm a writer over on Maxroll, and this build guide will be out whenever you're watching this. So if you are more into written form content, then this will be exactly what you're looking for, or after you watch the video if you need to catch up on something. Link will be in the description down below. Also, before we get into the video, a quickie word from today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. CyberGhost VPN is one of the global leaders in privacy and security with over 38 million users. VPNs are virtual private networks which hide your IP address and encrypt your data for maximum security while browsing. CyberGhost lets you access tons of major streaming platforms in different regions, giving you access to different content on Netflix, BBC, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and Disney. This allows you to surf the web with no limitations, even while traveling. This is achieved with their 7,000 servers across 90 countries. CyberGhost never records or stores any of its customers' data with an airtight, no-log policy. You can use CyberGhost on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, smart TVs, gaming consoles, and Linux, and one account can be used up to 7 devices. Try out CyberGhost VPN with code Palsteron for 84% off. That is just $2.03 a month with 4 months for free. And if you're still not sure, there is a 45-day money-back guarantee with a 24 hours customer service. Link to all of this down below in the description. And with that, let's get back to the video. First up, let's talk about our two main skills, Explosive Shot and Shockburst rounds. Explosive Shot is our main clear skill, and this is how it looks like without being in a map. It is extremely responsive, has a huge AoE, and also blinds enemies. But it has one distinct downside, which is in endgame, at some point it falls off against bosses, and then you need something a little bit more specific. In this case, we're using Shockburst rounds. Now, Shockburst rounds looks like this, and it is exactly what you think it is. It is an absolute Gatling gun. It just destroys bosses, as you saw in the intro video. And the thing about this skill is it doesn't really work unless the enemy is shocked. So you can kind of single out a target, shock it, and then burst it down. So we have one skill that's really good at pack clearing and one skill that's really good at single target, and we kind of combined them together. But there still needs to be something to combine them because Explosive Shot doesn't shock for our Shockburst rounds. So there's a lot of ways to do that with offhand swapping and whatnot, but the way I chose to do it, and it just fits perfectly into the build, is with the 3 dragons unique. Now, in order for Shockburst rounds to do any sort of damage, you need to look at this projectile part, pulse part. The pulse part only happens, this 148 only happens if the enemy is shocked. Otherwise, you're getting this tiny number here. So what happens is you really want to shock. 3 Dragons says fire damage from hits contributes to shock instead of ignite. That means that your Explosive Shot, which has only 30% conversion on the projectile, but on the explosion has 80%, all of that fire damage now goes toward your shock. This means your rotation will look something like this. You want to first shock the boss. For me, currently with my gear, it literally takes 1, maximum of 2 explosive shots, and then you go to town with Shockburst. Now, should the enemy still be there afterwards, which is usually only the matter with like pinnacle bosses, you just rinse and repeat. And there's some other skills you can put in between that we're also going to talk about, but that is sort of the rotation. Now, another really nice thing that the 3 Dragons helmet does is it says lightning damage from hits contributes to freeze buildup. That means your Shockburst rounds, which cannot shock on its own, it needs another skill to do that for it, loses shock, which it doesn't really lose, that's literally what it says, but you gain freeze. So against bosses, if you see them being frozen constantly whenever you're over on my stream on twitch.tv/Palsteron, or you're watching it in the intro, that is because of the 3 Dragons helmet. As well as that, we are using Heralds in this build. 3 of them. Heralds are basically these passive buffs that scale with your weapon that give you extra hits or explosions. For example, Herald of Lightning. Whenever you kill a shocked enemy, it will cause subsequent attacks. These are kind of like the thunder thingies that come down from the sky. These thunderbolts, they're 100% converted, very strong. And these are lightning damage. So that means they can also freeze. So not just your single target freezes, you're also freezing packs, which means that you activate Herald of Ice. And Herald of Ice says if you shatter an enemy, which happens because you freeze, you're now doing even more explosion damage. And this is another, for example, 229 attack damage. Herald of Thunder adds on top, 214. You can kind of see the gist. I would say least important in the chain is Herald of Ash, which has a similar effect to Herald of Ice. It kind of explodes with overkill, which is fire damage. But the the thing is, you can't really level it that high because it has a ridiculous strength requirement. So you have to keep it kind of down, but it's still very good. And it also has synergy with our passive tree over here because it gives us 50% fire damage. Other than that, we have Wind Dancer, which goes up to 4 maximum stages if you have 20% quality, usually just 3. And it just gives an absolute crap ton of evasions. For example, if you can see right here, my current evasion, this is with acrobatics up and tailwind stacks. Let's really quickly juice that up, is 6,885. And then whenever I deactivate it, you can see it is a lot worse. So this aura is absolutely insane. And as the last passive buff, I have Overwhelming Presence. Now this gives enemies nearby reduced elemental ailment threshold. That means 26% reduced. It's basically a meter that fills up. And if the enemy is at 74%, 100 minus 26, it gets the ailment instead of at 100%. So it's basically, it's just a multiplier for all your ailments. On top of that, I have Emergency Reload and Voltaic Mark. These are both for single target damage. And I'll be completely honest, I haven't really had the time to press them. Usually stuff just falls over, but I'm sure once I'm at pinnacle content, this will come in handy. Emergency Reload, what it basically does is, I'll show it off. So you can see how these have rounds, right? 18 rounds. So if I shoot and I go towards the end, I can press Q, and you saw right there, my rounds go up. It instantly reloads, and these have kind of like a yellow number, and that means they are enhanced. So as you can see right here, it gives you additional damage to empowered bolts, and you get even more from the premeditation here for a total of over 40% more damage, and you don't have to reload. And at the end, Voltaic Mark basically just makes it so enemies are easier to shock. I also have never needed this so far, but it gives you more damage against enemies that technically last for longer, so I'll probably use this eventually. It is extremely strong for what it does. As for DPS, unfortunately, the numbers here are completely unreliable because we're stacking so many additional projectiles, and Shockburst rounds shows the projectile here, and then the pulse here, you can see that is a lot higher, but it also does not show the additional projectile. Now, okay, your clear is pretty straightforward. Explosive Shot will explode everything with the help of these heralds, but how does your single target actually work? You have to shock the enemy, so understanding shock, probably a good idea. Let's run it down real quickly. The shock symbol is this up here. Whenever you see this under your enemy, under the boss, you know that the enemy is shocked. And this is what you kind of have to figure out. At the start, it's kind of annoying to look, but after like a few times, you kind of get the drill. Once this icon is up, that means enemies take 20% increased damage. Baseline, you can increase this with magnitude. It's not really that important. For Shockburst rounds, you just need the enemy to be shocked. Increasing that damage, sure, but it doesn't give any extra bonuses for being a higher shock, just so you know. It only lasts for 4 seconds. This is something we definitely have to address on the passive tree. I have quite a few jewels that actually have, I think it's somewhere here, ailment, no, this is ailment threshold, shock duration, for example, right here. I think I have 3 of these jewels in total, and you can also take rattled, which I'm probably going to do eventually as well. That just means that these 4 seconds will go to 8 or even more, because you don't want to constantly swap. That's just annoying. Now, shock is intrinsic to lightning damage. So whenever you do lightning damage, even if you don't have any chance to shock from the tree, you have a chance to apply it. Now, however, chance to shock still does a lot, because, for example, here, 25% increased chance to shock means you're 25% more likely to apply it. This depends on the damage you deal. So that means the better your weapon, the more damage nodes you have, the more chance that on the first hit, you're going to shock. Otherwise, it's going to be the second hit. So it's basically a flat chance that you can increase with this. So these kind of effects are extremely strong, as well as that on jewels for ailment effect and shock effect. And the last piece of the puzzle is Overwhelming Presence. This one is only in your presence though, which is 6 meters, which is round about here. So you want to have your boss in this vicinity. Against packs, it's not going to be that important. Don't put yourself in harm's way. But against bosses, you don't want to stand too far away. That is also one of the reasons why, for example, we'll go over this later, we take point blank instead of far shot. You might think this is an issue, but not really, because once again, our shock burst rounds freeze the enemy. Now, with skills out of the way, let's talk about support gems, because you want to enhance the damage or certain things like, for example, the shock effect from these skills. Explosive Shot starts off with Scatter Shot, which gives additional projectiles, extremely strong. All of these can overlap in shotgun. On top of that, you have Conduction. This just makes it way easier to shock, 100% more. It's a straight up multiplier. Martial Tempo, important to know, is reload speed gets increased by your attack speed. just so you're aware. So if you stack attack speed, that doesn't mean you have to constantly reload, because the reload also adjusts. So you can see this as 25% more attack speed, 25 more reload speed. Very strong. Then I have fire penetration, which is my 5th link, and I will update the rest on the max roll guide. I'm currently too poor to get a 6th link, but the 6th link, for example, for explosive shot would be fire infusion. I guess this important part here as well, the guide I can easily update here, the video, obviously. I mean, I can maybe pin a comment or something, but that's about it. But whenever there's a huge update, I will inform you on YouTube. As well as that, you can sometimes check back. As for Shockburst rounds, you go concentrate effect. It's your single target skill. You don't care about area. So it's a huge damage increase. Primal armaments, more weapon elemental damage. Shockburst rounds on the burst has a 100% conversion, so that's just straight up more damage. We have lightning infusion, which gives you, once again, more damage. And then we have heft. The way conversion works in this game is kind of weird, but I did test this out and it does work. If that changes, or maybe it's just a bug at some point, I will update it. For the last link, I'm a little bit undecided between Culling Strike and maybe Fresh Clip, but most likely Fresh Clip is just very strong because you have a lot of bolts to reload. Do note that the quality on Shockburst rounds, which gives additional bolts, is currently bugged. Really hoping this will get fixed in an update. It doesn't really take anything away, but it would make the skill even more busted. Herald of Thunder gets supported with Ice Bite and Innervate. What these basically do is if an enemy was shocked or an enemy was frozen whenever it died, and we're applying all of those, then you get certain buffs, certain global buffs for a certain amount of time. For example, for 3 seconds, I get extra damage as cold and extra damage as lightning. This is huge for clear. On top of that, I have Glaciation, which once again, Herald of Thunder can freeze. This gives us 50% more freeze buildup, so faster freezes, so you can activate your Herald of Ice faster. And then on top of that, lightning penetration, just so it does a little bit more damage. For 6 links, I'm not really sure. I will do an end game update at some point, but these do not have priority, and 6 links are extremely expensive right now. As for Herald of Ice, it's supported with Magnified Effect because this is your clear skill. This is where these big explosions come from, right? That you always see. Cold Infusion, more damage. Cold Penetration, more damage. And Cold Mastery, you guessed it, more damage. Herald of Ash, which just gives you extra clear speed. There's really only Fire Mastery that fits in here. Now, do note that there's some support gems that you can actually put into some of these. For example, Cannibalism, which is ridiculously strong, gives you a lot of recovery, but it costs an extra 15 spirit. So if you're confused why you can't reserve everything, that's why. And I'll say this later, but the way we reserve all of these is I get at least 50 spirit from my amulet in order to fit everything in. You get 100 from the campaign, 50 from your amulet. In total, that's 150, so you can reserve everything that you need here. In terms of emergency reload, I have Ingenuity here for extra CDR. I have Persistence for extra uptime, and then Premeditation, which gives you a little bit extra damage. Now, gameplay-wise, what's important? First thing is there is one mod that absolutely bricks you, and I kind of found it right now. Monsters have 95% increased ailment threshold. What this means is that I think at 100%, I don't even know if you could ever ailment stuff. You can still do it, right, against normal mobs and whatnot, but as you can see, my Herald of Ice doesn't really do much. So here it goes, right? I'm not really freezing anymore, and that's kind of, that sucks, right? So if you have that mod, that's kind of an issue. You're still clearing fine, so if you're, if you're strapped for maps, you can still run it, but it's just not, FYI, it's not gonna feel as good. Same thing goes for Burning Ground. I didn't find one, but it's basically a map mod. Now, I'm quickly going to showcase you this boss right here, and it's going to last a lot longer than these bosses would usually do because I can't shock it, and I'm probably also not going to freeze it, but I can kind of show you a few mechanics. Important to note about Explosive Shot is it has a projectile part and an AoE part. If the enemy is here and you just aim at the ground before it, the AoE will hit, right? Because it's ground explosion, and but if you want the projectile also to hit, you have to aim at the rare or a little bit behind it, right? So a little bit more up. So if the rare is here and you aim here, those projectiles that you see right here spreading out are going to connect with the boss, and then the AoE also hits. So that is a big deal, and why also a lot of people, or some people, claim that Pierce is pretty strong, but it's mostly just that they're not aiming correctly, at least in my opinion, but we'll see. So let's do the boss real quickly, and it's going to take a little bit longer here to freeze. So I'm actually going to apply Voltaic Mark. You can see right here that there's a depth submitting strike. I actually did get the shock off, and now you can see it's just basically dying. Okay, so I can still apply ailments. That is good. This is a tier 15 map, but yeah, if you have completely crappy gear, then Voltaic Mark, especially in maps like this, can really save you quite a bit. I didn't really even get to press emergency reload, unfortunately, but in general, this is how you do it. You go in, once you see that shock mark, you just start spraying. Now, if you're surprised why I did that much damage at the start, that was just because of these gloves. They're not really that good. This was just a lucky hit, because Decimating Strike could also just give me 5%. So these gloves always look flashy, but you would be better off with a more defensive option. Now, one important part when it comes to gameplay is also Pierce, Fork, and Chain. These are basically mechanics that make your projectiles, I mean, flashier, give you better clear speed and everything. Chain makes it so you hit an enemy and they kind of like ping pong around and like aim. And Fork makes it so enemies kind of spread out in the fork, which all sounds really good until you realize that it doesn't really work with Explosive Shot, because Explosive Shot, the explosion only happens at the last enemy. So let's say there are 2 enemies right here and I hit both of them, only the last explosion happens. So against bosses, for example, let's say you have Fork, the boss is here, you hit it, now the projectile forks out and the explosion never happens. You did only hit with the projectile part, and the explosion is going to happen somewhere back here, wherever the extra projectiles are going to land against the wall. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you guys, which is Pierce. That is the third one, right? Trifecta, Chain, Fork, Pierce. Pierce is an interesting one, and I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm just going to give you my opinion on it. I've seen people run it, and for example, Michael M here made a video about it, saying it doubled his damage. And I think what's happening here is actually a player error, but I'm not 100% sure. It might also be bugged, but the way it works is you can shotgun with all your projectiles and all these AoEs, at least as far as I know. However, like I said earlier, if you explode the projectiles before the rare or the boss, they're never going to connect. They're connecting with the ground, which then makes the explosions. So only the explosions hit. But in the video, he kind of pierces through and he kind of clicks behind the boss, and all of a sudden he does double damage because now the projectiles and the AoE both hit. I'm not 100% sure that's what's going on. I think this is something I'll probably get back to and maybe test a little bit, but I don't think Pierce actually doubles your damage. I will leave the link down below in the description just in case we find out something new, but that's so far my opinion on these things. Then let's go over the Ascendancy. Deadeye is the clear winner here. Now you might think, oh, crossbows, that's going to be mercenary. But no, right now the Ascendancies for Mercenary are just not really made for this kind of playstyle. Doesn't mean that the build will be bad, but it will be not optimal and not something I've tested myself, so I can't really give you too much advice on that. Maybe I'll make a video in the future on it. But when it comes to Deadeye, the first node you want is Gathering Winds. It gives you Tailwind on use. And if you hover over Tailwind at full stacks, which is 10 stacks, it gives you 30% attack speed, 10% movement speed, and 150 evasion rating. This is incredible. Now, one important thing to note is that Tailwind stacks happen whenever you use a skill. But when it comes to reloading, the reload also counts as a skill. So watch me just do one attack of Explosive Shot, and you will see I get 2 Tailwind stacks because the reload also counts. So it is way easier to keep these up than in any other build, which makes this next node even more ridiculous. Wind Ward, 3% less damage taken per Tailwind. That is a whopping 30% less damage taken with full uptime. You still most likely want to take this last unless you're really having trouble with defenses or something. But I would really take Point Blank second, Point Blank. You can also go Far Shot if you want to. My kind of playstyle, this just fits perfectly. Yeah, if you're in the enemy's face, you're going to do a lot of damage. The further away you are, the less damage. And then on top of that, Endless Munition. The reason I want to take Point Blank second is so I can take Endless Munition third. Skills Fire and additional projectile is just such a big damage multiplier. And it also gives you clear speed. Now, from Explosive Shot, going from 3 to 4 projectiles, because Explosive Shot already has +2 from Scatter Shot, 3 to 4, 33% more damage. On Shockburst rounds, it's a little bit more complicated because you might think, oh, it only has 1 projectile, now it's 2, so that's double. But that's not really true. I tested this out pretty extensively, and the way it works is it does slow the rounds down, but it does shoot 2 at a time, which is actually very good because it means your magazine doesn't run out as fast. So it does actually shoot 2 times. If you do not have +1 projectile, you will run out really fast and hit the reload faster. And as well as that, it's not 1-to-1, so you're still doing around about 30% more damage. Let's next talk about gear. Now, I will have a weapon swap section at the end because this is a little bit more complicated. Keep it to the end for the nerds, right? But I do have 2 crossbows. I just want to quickly talk about what this entails. So your Explosive Shot and your Shockburst rounds kind of want both a lot of damage, of course. But then there's one thing that Explosive Shot also wants, which is loads an additional bolt. See, Explosive Shot usually only reloads a single magazine, so you can fire 1 time. But with this, you can double shoot real quickly before you hit the reload, which is incredible while clearing. It just gives you a lot more freedom. It is not the end of the world if you can't get this, because it's quite expensive to get damage and that loaded bolt first. So, for example, if you have to decide between a 400 DPS weapon and a 300 with additional bolt, you're probably still taking the 400. But if the difference is not too far off, probably go for the additional bolt. This is also why I have 2 weapons, or one of the many reasons is because this kind of DPS is way higher on my second crossbow, but it doesn't have the additional bolt. This one was a lot cheaper, so I basically got the best of both worlds. But yeah, more on that in the weapon swapping section. So, what do you want on weapon? Percentage increased physical damage, as high as possible. From both the mod, it can go 100, 200, it can go very high if you have a lot of money. You also get 20% each from iron runes. Iron runes are very common. You will have to get 2 runes in, put those in. It's a huge damage increase. As well as that, you can see the quality up top. Use blacksmith whetstones to enhance this up to 20%. Loads and additional bolts, very nice. Now, other than that, attack speed is very good because it's also a multiplier to your reload speed. So attack speed would be premium. And after that, really, maybe some kind of mana mod, maybe dexterity, strength, something that gives you mana on kill is kind of nice. But other than that, there's not too much important stuff. But I want to emphasize here how important your weapon actually is. Your weapon multiplies all of these percentages on all of your skills. All of them. There's no extra damage outside or something. It's not like in Path of Exile 1. This is all your damage. So upgrading your crossbow and getting a good crossbow is mandatory. Before you have a good crossbow, all your money should be going into it, and then you think about everything else. Now, what kind of crossbow should you get? The best ones are the ones with high level requirement. The higher level requirement, the better they're most likely going to be. But if you want to know more about how to find a weapon, I actually have a video about that. I will link it down in the description. This is very, very important. There's a few tricks to it. But in general, you have to look at a few things. Attacks per second, reload time, pretty damn important. There are a few bases. For example, the Expert Dryad crossbow, which is a little bit of a trap, a little bit. Now it says loads an additional bolt. That is just implicitly on there. But you will see that the physical damage is lower than, for example, a 4-long crossbow. And on top of that, the reload time is higher. So sure, you're loading additional bolt, but you're also waiting longer on your reload. In general, I've felt like this with no additional bolt feels better than 1.1 with additional bolt. But beggars can't be choosers, right? If you don't have the money, maybe you can try out a Dryad crossbow. This is very much going to depend on your playstyle. And if you can't get the perfect base, don't worry about it. Just make sure that it has like 0.8, 0.85 is already on the worst part. Funnily enough, Bomber crossbow actually looks quite good, even though this grenade doesn't do anything. It's a very fast reload time and very fast attack speed. With that out of the way, the second most important thing, of course, is 3 dragons. You cannot play without. Watch the intro if you don't know how this works. It also gives you a ton of Ellie res, so it's also really nice to boot. Maybe you can get a high roll. After that, body armor is quite important. You want as much evasion rating as possible. In fact, I would probably trade this life roll for even more evasion if I could, because the thing is, there's a node on the passive tree called Bestial Skin. It basically doubles the evasion from your body armor. So the higher you go, that is doubled. Incredibly, incredibly important. Other than that, and you will see this on a lot of my items, is just fill it up with resistances or attributes. Now, same is true for Amulet, but here you want Spirit. Spirit, and then the rest, fill it up with resistances and attributes. Once again, rings, same spiel. You get life, and then fill it up with resistances and attributes. Now, if you can snag in a rarity roll here or there, that is very good for your loot, and it will kind of snowball you. But if you can't, for example, like this, then it is what it is. Now, added elemental damage is not that strong. If you could get added physical damage, that would be a damage boost. So that's also a really nice one. As for belt, I have +1 charm slot. I don't really feel them too much. I kind of have like antidote and thawing against freeze. They're okay, but they're kind of expensive right now, and I do regret the purchase, kind of. Other than that, fill it up with attributes and resistances. On boots, however, only thing that matters is your movement speed roll. 35% movement speed, which is the max, is very expensive right now, but 30 is quite affordable. 30 plus a life roll and maybe 1 or 2 resistance and attributes is very easy to get. So get that ASAP. That extra movement speed is going to help out a lot. At the end here, I have a Ares Veins wings, but I will probably replace this one pretty damn soon, just so you know. I don't even have my rune filled. Decimating Strike gives you quite a bit of extra damage. It's like 17.5% more damage. It's basically the thing that Witch Hunter has, right? The Ascendancy node. But the problem is, it's a really bad base. It has like a little bit of evasion, a little bit of attack speed, a little bit of int, but it doesn't have a life roll, and I just want more evasion and stuff like that. So this is probably on its way out, but at the time where I bought this, it was like 4 or 5 exalts. That's why I bought it. Do not invest into this item. If you want to know how really good gloves would look like, you can, for example, look at the max roll planner right here with flat physical damage, life, and attack speed being the most important ones. You can get up to 16% on these kind of gloves, and the rest you just fill out with resistances and attributes. Life and mana flask, I don't know what I'm doing. Increased recovery rate, gain some charges, reduce charges, whatever. I should probably at this point have quality on it and spend some glass blowers bubbles, but that's probably for later. As for jewels, your priority should be stuff like shock duration. So on this jewel, there's only 2 things I care about: shock duration, projectile damage. Once again, there's a lot of increased damage that has multiple variants. Projectile damage, crossbow damage, elemental damage, all of these are valid and you can find them on trade. Damage with crossbows, projectile damage, elemental ailment threshold, right? Attack speed, shock duration once again. Damage with bows does not help. Chance to inflict ailment is a big one, because chance to shock is straight up a multiplier, and especially if you're having problems applying shock, that is right there. Accuracy, don't really think about it too much. Attack speed is also quite strong, because once again, it also works on your reload speed, but you kind of get the gist. Now you can buy magic jewels and regal them yourself. In general, it's going to be emeralds. Emeralds have all the mods that you want. Don't even worry about rubies or sapphires. Emeralds are where it's at. Now, if you're leveling and you're like, I'm too lazy to put in these jewels, or I don't want to trade 2 exalts for a jewel, you do. In total, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 jewels. If you just invest like a total of 10 exalts or something into this, you can, I don't know, get like 60 or 70% more damage just with that increased damage, extra shock stuff. You being lazy is not a good idea when it comes to jewels. They are a lot stronger than you might give it credit for. Now, then let's go over the passive tree. I will take the max roll tree right now because this is going to be in the weapon swap section. I've currently a few weapon swap passives in game, but on the max roll planner and on the max roll guide, I have a very clean cut one that is basically going to guide you without having any of that. But I would still highly recommend watching that section. Now, important on the passive tree is you want as much percentage increased damage as possible. Important to know, your skills don't have all 100% conversion. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them are fire, some of them are lightning. So in general, stuff like projectile and attack damage that doesn't distinguish between fire, lightning, elemental, physical is very premium. So stuff like this, right? Stuff that just says increased damage with hits. This is incredibly, incredibly potent. Same goes for stuff like Coming Calamity, which you have all 3 heralds and it gives you just 50% increased ally damage. Maiming Strike, increased attack damage, just straight up. Now, you also want movement speed, skill speed, attack speed. All of that goes into that. Also, Exploit is pretty nice because it gives increased duration of your shocks, but you can also get this on jewels. This you take very late. It's basically just even more evasion. Now, when you're around about level 50 to level 70, it is a little bit weird to transition because you're most likely going to level with bows. It is just way smoother and way better. If you want to know how to transition from those trees into this tree, I'll link down a video in the description, which is going to give you some advice on that. So check that out. But in short, you can start crossbows whenever you get instant reload for all this reload speed right here, which is very premium. And then down here, reusable ammunition. And also these nodes give crossbow reload speed. This is just going to make it feel way better. In general, if you're not weapon swapping, you still want to take these lightning damage nodes, even though they don't work for your explosive shot, because they're just so goddamn strong. Also, Flash Storm, the chance to shock, works on your explosive shot as well, because it can also shock. On top of that, Lightning Rod is incredible. This gives you Lucky, which means that you have a wide variety of damage. So for example, you look at my crossbow in game. You can see up top 92 to 373. That is the damage range you have. So let's say on your hit, you hit a 100, which is very low. Lucky means the game will calculate one more time and then take the higher number. So it's a very good damage multiplier. Super important for explosive shot is the area of effect, which just straight up increases your clear. It only works for attacks, but do remember that all your heralds are attacks. So also the explosions from that will get scaled. And once again, if you weapon swapped, you could put this on one and then more damage on the other for your Shockburst because you don't need area of effect on Shockburst. So yeah, it's again. Giant Slayer, very strong. Now, I guess the only thing I really have to call out over here is first up Acrobatics. Acrobatics has a steep downside of 70% less evasion rating, which is rough, but it can evade all hits, which means AoE attacks from bosses. Now, you shouldn't take those, but sometimes it happens, and especially in maps, you'd sometimes get jumped on. So Acrobatics, very strong once you're in red maps, but do not do this unless you have a ton of evasion. And with a ton of evasion, I mean round about 13 to 15,000 or higher. Now, I will quickly respec this. So without Acrobatics, I have 86% evasion, but that's without Tailwind stacks, right? So if you actually want to see this, you have to wait until you have 10 Tailwind stacks. 89% evasion, almost capped, 22,774, ridiculous amounts, right? So, and this can get even better. With Acrobatics on, that gets cut really hard. So it will go down to 60. Okay, now I don't have the Tailwind stacks up. I think it's was 66 or 67. Actually 68, 69. Oh, perfect number. Percent evasion, right? But that also includes all those boss attack and all those rares jumping at you. So in my personal opinion, that is definitely the way to go in endgame. You can test this out for yourself, but if you're dying in red maps, that is probably going to be the biggest thing. And you should be getting a better body armor and just across the board more evasion. Fill out more of these percentage evasion notes that I have right here. I currently do not have Careful Conservationist, but that would be the next thing I'm doing. The last thing here I need to call out is Polymathy and Jack of all trades. I will probably take this in endgame. I'm currently at the point where I can't really level up certain gems anymore, and I think it would actually be worth it. But early game, you have all these increased damage notes to take. It is actually quite not worth it. So you really want to get your attributes from your items if you can. However, if you can't, it is what it is. At least take Polymathy. Maybe don't take Jack of all trades, but this 10% increased attributes coupled with these small nodes can help quite a bit. But once again, 5 nodes is a steep price. With that said, let's talk about weapon specialization sets. So currently I'm using 12 points that I don't have just allocated, I have them swapped between weapons. So whenever I have this on, 12 points are in some area, and then whenever I swap my weapon, I have it in a different area. The way this works is you have to go in here and allocate one weapon to your main hand and one to your offhand. For example, my explosive shot right here is connected to this weapon. How you do that? Usually both of these are ticked. Used with weapon set. Untick one of them and make this your main explosive shot weapon. On Shockburst rounds, you do exactly the opposite and bind it to the second weapon swap. And this has more implications than just a passive tree because I will show you this right now. So usually you only have one crossbow shot. That is your auto attack. Or wherever you, like, you swap your rounds and then whenever you attack with crossbow shot, that round will be fired. Okay. But if you have 2 crossbows, you have 2 crossbow shots here. So what happens is, usually you have to press an extra button to swap. But now that explosive shot is only, for example, for me on left click and Shockburst rounds is on right click, I don't have to swap anymore. Hands up. This is me clicking left and automatically it's going to go. Now I click right click. It automatically swaps. You don't have to do any extra swapping, which this might seem like a minor thing if you've never played this build before, but it's just really comfy. And whenever you're against bosses and you have to remember all these button presses, this can help out a lot. However, do not, and I mean do not, put up a weapon swap if you have one bad crossbow. Only go for it when both of your crossbows are at least equally good. Otherwise, you're scuffing yourself. So this is obviously something that you have to get into once you have enough currency to do so. One good one definitely trumps 2 bad ones. As for the passive tree, I already made a video about this. I will link it down in the description where I exactly explain how you fill these in. But in short, on one of my weapon swaps, I have AoE over here. I have the reload speed, and I have movement speed on kill. This is the one explosive shot, obviously, which I use while mapping. Then I get to the boss, and I swap to my offhand, which, once again, goes automatically. You don't have to weapon swap. With the Shockburst rounds, once this is up, I have all this lightning damage. I have lucky lightning damage, I have lightning penetration, and even more lightning penetration up top. So, to summarize, if you are new to the game or you're just starting out with this character, take it slowly. You don't have to do the weapon swap stuff. Maybe once you get to like 70, 80, whenever. But you should do it eventually. It is a huge power spike. And if you don't do it, that's your own fault. As for leveling, I already have a video out. I will also link it down in the description about leveling from 0 to hero. So basically from 0 to 60, the campaign, everything after that concerns this video. But you basically need 3 dragons and you need a good crossbow and you're ready to go. You can basically slam in whatever. I usually go safe and tell people just play bows and whenever you're ready. But I basically went ham for it at level 45. Had a good crossbow, had 3 dragons, and I was demolishing the campaign. I've never seen anything like this, just so you know as a heads up. And yeah, that's about it. If there's any more questions, put them down below, and I will most likely make an FAQ. So if you have actually played the build and you still have some questions unanswered, probably go there. If you haven't already, also check out the max roll guide. There's always kind of overlap, but certain things I can put better in written form. If you want updates for the build, sub. That's probably the best way to get them. I will be making follow-up videos, of course, not just FAQs, but also whenever I find new stuff. Or just drop by my stream over on twitch.tv/Palsteron and see it there first. But yeah, with that being said, I still don't have a slogan. See you next time.